Um, I'm the development and outreach librarian at the Blackstone Library in Brantford. And we do these roundtable events every couple months. So keep an eye out for future events. We're gonna try some different things, get more speakers in, have some times where we're just talking with each other and catching up. But for today, we are so lucky to have Sharon Danosky here with us. Sharon is the president and founder of Danosky and Associates, an action-oriented, results-driven consulting firm that builds nonprofit capacity. Sharon is a strategist and thought leader whose nonprofit experience began by being a member of a team that raised the funds to build a new hospital almost 40 years ago. And that began her love of fundraising. Since then, she's raised hundreds of millions of dollars for health and human service organizations, animal and environmental organizations, arts and cultural organizations, and libraries. She has taught boards, CEOs, executive directors, and development directors how to raise funds most effectively. And we are so fortunate she's here with us today to teach us a few things about capital campaigns. So welcome, Sharon.
Thank you so much, Katie, and thank you for that nice introduction. It's really funny. My very first hospital, we built a new hospital for $20 million. So you can imagine how much further money went 40 years ago. And I'd like to just acknowledge my client support manager, Casey Kroll, who's on this call.
Can't believe that I don't have my earbuds.
Hello. If I can ask you all to please mute your microphone so we don't get a lot of background noise and distraction, that'd be really appreciated. And I also want to say I am open to having questions. So if you have a question, please put it in the chat and I'd be happy to address it. And I'll also take questions at the end. And if we run a little bit over, I'm happy to continue to stay on to answer any other questions. I'd like to ask you to turn off your videos and your mics to reduce distraction. You'll receive a copy of the deck and a recording. And if you have any questions or comments, please type them in the chat. We'll try to get to as many as possible. And if not, then I'll answer them offline. So I'm happy to do that. I'm also going to turn off my video so you can completely see the presentation and not be distracted by me either. So I'd like to begin with a poll. How many of you are considering expanding or renovating your current library within the next 5 years? And if you can answer the poll question. All right, for some reason it didn't show up on my screen, so I'm not exactly sure how many people responded to that. Oh, here it is, great. So 2/3 of you are thinking of expanding within the next 5 years. That's great. This hopefully will answer a lot of your questions. For those who aren't expanding, understanding what goes into a capital campaign, should the question ever arise, is a really good background, because capital campaigns are essential if you're going to do any kind of a building or major project. So how you fund your renovation is through a capital campaign. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what to expect for a campaign. And I apologize, my phone hasn't rung all day and now it seems to be ringing off the hook. And that's one thing I just can't seem to control, unfortunately. Oh, I love this. My board is always threatening, promising, wishful thinking about adding on the program room. Well, those are the kinds of things that you can absolutely fund through a capital campaign. And capital campaigns can be as large or as small as you wish. So for one room, you can have a capital campaign for $500,000 or $1 million. Or if you're doing a renovation to your library, you can try to have a campaign for $3 to, $5 million. If you're someplace like the Westport Library, you can launch a $30 million campaign. Campaigns are large and mammoth, or campaigns are small and viable. What you can expect of a campaign is this: they are extremely structured and methodical in their approach. There is almost a formula to capital campaigns, and this formula has been around for almost 100 years. You have campaigns in response to an urgent need. You can't add a children's room or add a new wing or renovate a building based on your operating budget. It doesn't work. And most of you probably don't want to borrow significant funds to add on. So a campaign is a great way of doing it. They employ common sense, though when you first start in a campaign, it doesn't make sense at all. It's almost counterintuitive. But as you get into the campaign, you really see how much sense they really make. I will tell you, they require significant commitment and determination on the part of your library. They're not for the faint of heart. You have to be all in with a capital campaign, and they are much like a marathon. You're not sprinting. You've got to, it's the long haul. It takes several years, and you have to keep your eyes on the finish line. But people are waiting to be asked to help. People are waiting to give. And it's basically our job to ask them. So what do you need in a campaign? The first thing you need is a really good case for support. Why do you need to raise this money? People don't give to you unless you have a really solid reason for a case. The next thing that you need are donors willing to give. So we set up a whole process so that you understand who your prospect list is. We rate, we review them, and the best thing you need to do is identify your best 30 to 50 donor prospects. And I'll talk with you in a minute about how you use that. And the final thing you need to do to launch a campaign is people who are willing to ask people to give. And that comes from your board, that comes from your volunteers. So whoever it was that said, so Wendy, that your board is always threatening, promising, wishing for a capital campaign, well, that's great, because they will have to carry that ball over the finish line. This is the role for the board. You as the library director, executive director, cannot run a campaign on your own. It really is everyone got to be all in. So I want to take each of these and go into a little bit more detail. The first being the case for support. So the case for support is a good sized document, and it is not a marketing piece. As a matter of fact, the only time you use a case for support is during the feasibility study for a capital campaign. I like to think of it a lot as an IPO for a new company. You know how a new company is going public, the initial public offering, and first you go to your family and friends. Well, that initial public offering has all the detail information, has all the background, all the startup information, all the information of what they're going to use the money for, how they're going to use that money. This is much of the same thing. So you need to start with background and need. You begin a little bit with your history of your library. And most of you have a wonderful history, because our libraries in Connecticut were all begun by either a group of women or one particular woman. I do note most of them were women and not men. Just pointing that out. But they were begun by some caring, passionate people who really wanted to have a library in their own town. So you begin with that kind of interesting, compelling history. And then your need for the project. You know, why do you need this additional renovation? Why do you need a larger space? It's interesting because I've done a few library campaigns over the years. And sometimes when I hear people say, what do you need to renovate or expand the library? Our library is going to be obsolete. I'm sure many of you were familiar with the Pew research that was done on libraries back in 2016. The Pew Foundation did a really huge survey and found that libraries were growing and were more needed today than they've ever been. And I think even this pandemic has shown how effectively libraries have pivoted, and libraries are really a center for learning. They're a hub of information. You know, it's funny when you look back at the very first library in Alexandria, they had the long rows, but there weren't a ton of books in that library. It was a place for people to meet, to have discourse, to share ideas. That's one of the things that is so essential in a library renovation. You need to talk about why now, who will benefit from the renovation or additional room, and why your organization should be doing this and what your track record has been. So when you go into the background, then the next thing you need to do is to go into detail on your proposed initiative. A lot of times it's really good to have renderings or drawings at this stage. However, they don't need to be the final drawings. They really just need to be a concept of what you're looking to do so that people you're talking to can visualize what you're looking at. So you need to describe what you plan to do, what will be the benefits of what you're doing, and why is it an urgent need. Then you get into the project description, a description of the initiative, why a building, how will the change system work, how does it meet a need, and then finally, you need to have a budget, a cost, and a goal. So the budget doesn't need to be a detailed line by line by line item budget, but it needs to be enough to show that the demolition will cost so much money, the renovation will cost so much money, the new construction will cost so much money, and the soft costs will cost so much money. So you need to give people a sense of what it's going to cost when you're doing this, and include the goal that you're looking to raise money. So that's the case for support. Does anyone have any questions before I move on to developing the donor list? Just going to give you a second. All right, not hearing, and you can come back to it or just pop it into the chat. So after you do the case, I should also say the case for support should not be a glossy printed brochure. It really should almost look like a white paper. And I have seen some where literally we slab the word draft all over it, so people know it is a work in process. This is what the case for support is. And when I get into the feasibility study, I'll explain a little bit more of how it's used. The next thing to think about is developing the donor list. When you are going to a campaign, there are two things that are absolutely critical for someone to give to you. Number one, and probably the most important, is affinity. And the second is capacity. Affinity is important because the people who will give you the most money are the people who love and know you. It is not from that stranger who might have a lot of money, and so you go and ask them on the long shot that she that they want to give to you. The people who support your campaign are the people who know and love you the most. Capital campaigns are not made up of 1,000 people in your community giving to you. It's made up of those people who care about you the most. So therefore, we have to carefully prospect and understand the people who are giving to you. They're your current donors. They might be friends and associates. They might be individuals aligned with similar causes in the area. Though for a library, that doesn't always necessarily hold true. I will tell you a campaign that I was doing in Sherman, Connecticut. One of the major donors was someone who was a huge supporter of the New York Library in New York City. So, she was a good supporter of the local library, but she was a huge supporter in the campaign because she cared so much about libraries. So you really need to look at your own donor database and find 100, 150 of your very, very best donors and people who you think will give to you. Then you walk through what I call a rate and review. And the goal of the rate and review is to come away with 30 to 50 of your best donor prospects. So we rate them based on affinity, and we rate them based on capacity. So we give them a score between 1 and 4, 1 being the highest and 4 being the lowest. I know that's counterintuitive, but it works for me. And you say, this individual's affinity, what kind of affinity? Is it a 1, a 2, a 3, or a 4? If they are giving to you and they volunteer for you, they serve on a committee, they serve on your board, they stop in regularly, they go to a lot of your Zoom programs, that is a person who has a 1. Someone who might have a low affinity might be someone who has higher capacity, but is only giving you $50 a year. If someone has the capacity to give you a $100,000 check and they're giving to you $50 a year, they're not in love with you. Someone who, has never given does not have a good affinity for you. So you need to look at affinity and capacity. And capacity is the same. It's one on a scale of 1 to 4, how big a check can they write? That's not how much they've given to you. That goes into the affinity column, but how big a check can they write? Can they write a check for 6 figures over 5 years? Or can they only write a check for $500? And so you want to understand, what the affinity and what the capacity is of the donors you're looking at. And we love to come up with 30 to 50 of those donors. And we interview 25 of the best donors. Now, the interview brings us to the next element in the campaign, and that is a feasibility study. My strong belief is that no campaign should ever be undertaken without a feasibility study. So what a feasibility study does is 2 things. It assesses your readiness to undertake a campaign. Can you really go into this capital campaign? And it also tests the campaign assumptions, the case, the leadership, the prospects. And it does one other thing. It prepares your donors for a campaign. Donors of high net worth, donors who have a lot to give, donors who are very philanthropic, understand capital campaigns. There is a saying in fundraising, and the saying goes like this: if you ask for money, you get advice. If you ask for advice, you get money. The feasibility study is the ultimate advice asking medium that we have in fundraising. And so we meet with people, who are your 25 best donors, and we share with them the case for support. And we share that case for support and basically say, what do you think? And they will tell us. So you conduct the feasibility study, you define the objectives of your campaign, You select the individuals to interview. I develop, if I'm doing a feasibility study, I have a survey questionnaire that I use that I tailor to your local library. And we then send letters out to the potential people who asking for an interview. And then your consultant conducts the confidential interviews. So that's the process for a feasibility study. You identify who is supposed to be interviewed. You develop a case for support, and then your consultant will conduct the interviews. During the interview, it's really interesting, and the interviews can typically be done in 20 minutes. So when you're asking someone to meet for an interview, you're asking, will you meet for 20 minutes? And you basically are saying, we're considering going into a capital campaign. We've decided to do a feasibility study. We've hired a consultant. Would you be willing to be interviewed by the consultant so we can get your feedback on our project and see whether or not there is financial support out there? When I sit down and do an interview, I begin by asking, so what do you think of the library? How is the library doing? What do you think of the board? How about the staff in the library? I kind of get sick of hearing that the staff walk on water, but that's just what it is when you do these interviews. And you ask generally, how important do you think the library is in our community? And people will answer. The next phase of the interview goes into your project. And I'll usually start off, if I'm doing it, so what did you think about the case for support? What do you think about what the library is planning to do? Do you think it's a good idea? Do you think it can be done? Do you think it's too much money? Do you think it's not enough money? Give me your thoughts on it. And they will give me a whole host of their feelings, their sentiments, what they think. They'll give a ton of really good ideas. People come prepared for these interviews. I often see them walk in with the case for support and it's a little dog-eared, or they might have circled something on it. And they have their questions written down. They have their questions like, how long is this going to take? Is the library prepared to undertake something like this? It seems like an awful lot of work. How are they going to manage it? Are they going to hire staff? A good consultant in a feasibility study will never answer the donor's question. All we say is, thank you for your questions. I will bring it back to the library. And that's our goal here, is just giving the possibility for the donor to ask the questions. The third part of the feasibility interview is probably the most interesting. And that's where the consultant actually sits down and shares with them a gift table, which I will show you in a minute, and say, all right, is this something that you would financially support? And hopefully that person said yes. And then we say, so how much, what range do you think you might consider a gift over a period of 5 years? And most of them will tell you, yeah, I think I'd like to give 100,000 over 5 years, whatever. And that's a really kind of exciting thing to hear. And then I also usually recommend asking if they would consider a legacy gift. Have you ever considered leaving the library in your will? Another great piece of information, because that way you know how many people are thinking to undertake to leave you in their will. Also, when you're doing a campaign for a library, it's often a good idea to add an endowment component to it. So the most recent campaign I've done, we added a $300,000 endowment to it. And we had one person who said he actually was in his 90s. He's left us in his will. So that gift might be coming along in 5, 10, or 20 years. You never know. And the other actually gave an outright contribution to the endowment. So adding an endowment component is a good thought when you're doing this as well. And the final fourth piece of the feasibility interview is asking whether or not that particular individual or individuals might be interested in helping out with the campaign. About 30 or 40% of those interviewed say yes, and then they can go on your campaign cabinet. And we ask for other people who might be interested in supporting this as well. So those are the elements of the interview. And you come away from the interview, and what you should have is a good, sound idea of how much you'll be able to raise. So the deliverables of campaign planning is recommendation on whether to proceed with a campaign. If you have a $5 million building project and all you can raise is 1 million, you've got to rethink your project. I actually was the president of the board of the Sherman Library in Connecticut when we were exploring a capital campaign. Another consultant had already done the feasibility study, and it came back that our building plan was 4.5 million. And the town said, we don't think the town can support a $4.5 million or needs a $4.5 million library. You need to cut it back to about 3 million. And so when we hired the architects and the project manager, we said, no, we can't do 3.7 million. We can't do 3.5 million. We can only do 3.2 million because that's what we knew that we could raise. And so it gives you the ability to pare back your project to what you can afford. If you have any kind of endowment, certainly, or any reserves, you can certainly use that. In the case of Sherman Library, we didn't have, it wasn't an endowment, but a woman like 15 years ago had given us $750,000 and said, we'd like for you to use this on whatever might be most important for the campaign. So we managed to keep the building costs down to 3.25, but the $750,000 allowed us to initiate the campaign and to meet the State Hospital Association match. And so we eventually paid back the $750,000 we used because we raised the rest of the money, but that money was there for us to use if we needed it. So you get a good sense of how much you can raise toward the campaign. You also get identification of areas which need to be refined, changed, or further developed. You know, if it is overwhelming, the number of people who say, you know, we'd really like a much larger children's room, we'd have a much larger community room or whatever, then you need to take that into consideration because it is feedback from your donors in the community. Certain things do come back with recommendations. As a matter of fact, there has seldom been any time where questions or recommendations don't come back. Someone might say, we really need a larger community room. You might have already looked at that. And then you can answer that donor saying, we've looked at that, and these are the reasons why we don't feel it's necessary. These are the reasons why we can only do this. So it gives you a really good sense of what people's concerns are and how you can address those concerns. It identifies campaign leadership. You know, who is willing to step out and help you raise this money? It projects a reasonable campaign goal. A campaign goal, you set a goal for the quiet phase of the campaign. I'll talk a little bit more about the quiet phase later. There's a quiet phase and a public phase. And so it helps you set a campaign goal. You don't want to ever set a campaign goal that you can't achieve. Doing so hurts a library or any organization for a long period of time. People will look at you as if, well, they tried to do a campaign or they tried to do a $5 million campaign, $1 billion campaign, but they only raised 3 million. Much better to say, well, they started out with a $2 million campaign, but they raised $3 million. It makes you seem much more in a leadership position. It appears that many more people are supporting you instead of people not supporting you. So setting your goal is a very particular thing that you have to do with a great deal of care. And finally, the feasibility study will show you a plan of action of how you can raise the money. Any questions on any of this? Please share with me. All right, here is a gift table for $3 million. This is how we raise money. If you are going into a $3 million campaign, you cannot do it with a bunch of $1,000 and $2,500 gifts. It will take you forever and a day. You need to start with your largest gifts first. In this example, one gift of $500,000, 2 gifts of $250,000, 4 gifts of $100,000, and 10 gifts of $50,000. If you notice, the majority of your money, almost $2 million is coming from basically 17 gifts. And this is how campaigns are typically done, where most of the money is raised right here. The smaller gifts, these gifts are in the public phase of the campaign. It is a lot more work to get $100,000, $1,000 gifts than it is to get $200,000 or $400,000 gifts. And this is what we tried to tease out in the feasibility study. How many people are out there who will give you a $500,000 or $250,000 gift? For every organization, there is usually this money hidden in your donors. Even though you might not have ever achieved this kind of money before, for every organization, there is that kind of money hidden within your donor database. One of my favorite stories was raising money for a land trust. And our goal was modest. It was $1 million. And they hadn't really identified anyone with huge capacity. And they were scheduling the interviews for me. And they scheduled them back to back to back. So it was really tough to spend the time I needed to spend. And this one particular donor met me at the chairman of the board's house. So she and I are in the living room and the chairman of the board is in the kitchen. And I ask the question and I say, where do you see yourself in this campaign? And literally, the top gift there was $250,000. She pointed to that and she said, that's where I see myself. I want to be the lead donor in this campaign. Bowled over because yes, now we really do have a campaign. The funny part of this story was that the chairman of the board kept poking her head in, letting me know I was late to my next meeting. But this donor had a lot of questions and I was not about to leave her side when she had just said, I want to be the $250,000 donor in this campaign. So we did manage to schedule my interview that was after her. But these surprises often happen. I want to show you another gift table. This is one that has $1 million as its lead gift. And then you can see you need like 100 less gifts than you did before. And so you can break out a gift table. And often I will break out a gift table based on your rate and review and what you think the capacity is. So you can test anything. And the gift table is not a done deal. It's just what kind of gifts are we looking for? So if you have someone who you think might have the capacity for $1 million gift, I'm not going to show that person this gift table. I'm going to show this gift table. So here's where the money comes from. So 65 or more % of the money comes in during the quiet phase of the campaign. And that comes from your campaign cabinet and your board, the people who participate in the feasibility study, and other lead and major donors. Your corporations and foundations, maybe 20%. If you have a library matching gift, a challenge gift, it would come in there. So that's usually 20, 25% of your funds come from that. It's tough for libraries to get corporate support unless you're a city library. If you are a suburban or a rural library, there aren't any corporations. And so, you know, getting corporate support is really tough. Foundation support is difficult as well. Sometimes your community foundations will give to you, or there might be some family foundations in your area who would give to you. It's not like a lot of other nonprofits where you can get a lot of corporate and foundation support. So when your board thinks that you're going to get a lot of corporate support, the answer is how many corporations are actually in your town? And, you know, they're giving to a lot of other things than libraries. So most of your money will be coming from individuals. And that's the 15% is everybody else. And that's the lower end of the gift table. All right, so a little bit about the timeline. Early preparation. So the early stages of a campaign, you prepare the draft case for support, you review, evaluate, and identify the individuals who'll be interviewed. This can often take anywhere from 2 months to 6 months, and I've literally had a couple of people take 18 months. And one person I am working with, it has been over 2 years to try to get this done. A lot of times I'll hear people say, oh no, this only takes us a month or so, we'll have everything ready. It doesn't. It just takes time to get this stuff done. And when you're looking at the draft case for support, it's got to be vetted by your board. There's a lot of people weighing in on it. There's a lot of nuances that have to be ironed out. So the early preparation, I really recommend that you plan more like 4 to 6 months. So if you're looking at your timeline of when you want to get this done, basically it can take anywhere from, say, 5 to 9 months to really get the campaign off the ground and running. And so if you're looking at when you want to really start your project, you need to back up when you start this. The good news is that most consultants work on a project basis and not hourly or anything like that. So when you hire a consultant, it really doesn't matter if it takes 9 months or it takes 4 months. You're not paying any more money, and you have that consultant online who can help you through the preparation project. So don't be hesitant to go out for, you know, an RFP to a consultant, you know, well in advance of when you're actually hoping to begin building or begin your campaign, because there is significant lead time. And if you don't put the lead time into a campaign, it will not be as successful. You have to carefully vet your donors. You have to carefully draft your case for support, and you very carefully have to go through the feasibility process for a campaign to be ultimately successful. All right, I still don't see any questions. You're all feeling good about this. Just put something in the chat to let me know that it's all okay. So the key success factors for a campaign: a compelling case, donors willing to support it, and board and volunteers willing to ask for money. Now I want to go into, after the feasibility study is over, how do you actually launch a campaign? Because this is all the planning for the campaign, then you launch a campaign. So Once the feasibility study is done, the consultant will give you a report and basically recommend whether or not there is a viable campaign here or not. During the feasibility study, you will test how much you can raise. You might test 3 million, you might test 5 million, you might test 10 million, whatever it is. The actual feasibility study will probably come in lower than what you tested. And that's not unusual, that's common. And we really do want you to test higher and to push yourself and then see how much we can raise. And that's why the feasibility is so valuable, because then you actually know how much money you can spend on your project. So the board then receives a report, and I highly recommend a board vote, a resolution to embark on a capital campaign. It is a significant thing in an organization's life, and the board should vote. Then we set up a campaign infrastructure, and you usually use your consultant to do that. So the campaign infrastructure includes the campaign budget. It includes naming opportunities. It includes taking the case for support and developing marketing materials and whatever you're going to need, developing frequently asked questions, training the volunteers on how to solicit a gift, pulling the campaign cabinet together, developing gift acceptance policies, coming up with naming opportunities, and getting everything lined up so you can solicit those first gifts. Once all of those things have been lined up, and it takes about 6 weeks to do that, what I like to refer to is a feasibility reception is held for those who participated in the feasibility study. So great question. So one person says, we're going to referendum to have the voters approve a new building in November. The board is busy with vote yes activities. We would like to spend more than what the town is allowing us to go to the voters for. What is your advice about the timing to start a capital campaign? You still need to do a feasibility study to know how much you're raising. Ideally, because we actually did this in Sherman too, we did the feasibility study before we got the vote yes, so that we knew what concerns and questions people had about the project during the feasibility study, and then we could address them when we did our calling campaign to get the vote out. And if someone said, well, I'm concerned about this, we knew what they were concerned about so that we could answer. So we did the feasibility study prior to the vote. And then when we got the vote yes, we went into the quiet phase of the campaign. And what we were just saying is we're in the early stages of raising funds for the campaign to see how much we can afford from private philanthropy. And so we still structured the campaign the exact same way, going into the quiet phase. And then when we had 2/3 of the money, 3/4 of the money, which included the town money and the state library grant, then we went into the public phase of the campaign. So the timing is really critical in terms of how you do that. So I don't know if there's time that you're voting in November. If you must have a case for support by now, I would imagine. I would see if you could at least go to 10 or 12 of your major donors for the feasibility study. And then maybe you could continue the rest of the feasibility study after the vote yes, so that you have a good sense of how much you can actually raise to go into the campaign. Now, the feasibility reception that we hold, so this is really interesting. And the reason we did this was because of a library. This particular library was all set to go into a campaign in 2008. And then the financial crisis hit and they stopped the campaign, and they got really, really gun shy. And so I worked with them to do a strategic plan. We did a community assessment. We did a strategic plan. We ended up getting approval for more town-funded money on an annual basis. And then the community assessment really said, and the plan said, they really needed to expand and renovate the library. But they were so concerned, well, can we afford it? We don't know if we can afford it. We don't really want to go into a campaign. So they finally decided they will go into a feasibility study. The feasibility study came back that they could raise 1.5 million, and we were all set to launch, and the pandemic hit. And so what I ended up doing was basically convincing them to go anyway, to go through a campaign anyway. We had no idea. I mean, remember, we all thought it was going to last 3 or 6 months. And so I said, look, there's a lot of work to do. We should just roll this out. And the campaign chair on the board was a woman who had been president of a college and had undertaken a capital campaign during the financial crisis, and it worked out fine. So we said, great. And we couldn't meet. So I said, let's hold our feasibility reception via Zoom. We can invite everyone. All the participants were delivered a little goodie bag with like a small bottle of wine and some snacks. And I think there was a little book that was included in there about the history of the library. And we developed the PowerPoint. We went through how we were going to present all of this. Now, typically, when I do a feasibility reception in person, we get maybe 40 to 50% at most of the participants actually coming in person. 95% of those who were interviewed showed up on Zoom, and it was amazing. I mean, there were questions, there was a lot of interest, people were really happy. It was such a fun Zoom meeting. So they went to town, and then they started doing the campaign solicitations during Zoom. And I will have to tell you, for this library, if there were 5 in-person solicitations for this entire campaign, which, by the way, they're now at $2.7 million, and are probably going to exceed their campaign goal, their revised goal from 1.5, they're going to go over 3 million. All of the cultivation receptions were held via Zoom, and it worked. And even when we can go back to face on a routine basis, I would always recommend holding a feasibility reception via Zoom. People come. So after the feasibility reception, then you launch the quiet phase of the campaign. I want to just talk a little bit now about creating campaign infrastructure. The first thing that you need to do is to recruit a campaign cabinet. During the feasibility and planning stages, it's often a good idea to have a campaign steering committee. That steering committee basically helps identify the prospective donors to be interviewed and approves and helps with developing the case for support. But during a campaign, you need a group of people willing to ask people for money. And so you recruit a campaign cabinet. I strongly discourage recruiting people for the committee because, well, they're really good at keeping records and they really want to be involved. The campaign cabinet is who is going to be asking for the funds. They're going to be the ones out there asking for money. And if you don't have a strong cabinet for asking for money, you don't have a campaign. So your campaign cabinet has to be people willing to ask for a pledge. Next, you have to revise the case for support. If you remember, I said the case for support is really only for the feasibility study. When you draft a case for support, everyone is going to tell you there's too much information, it's too long, it's not a good marketing piece. Well, it isn't a marketing piece. It is given to your prospective high-end donors to see if they have any questions or recommendations on the project. It is not a marketing piece. The next thing, after you kind of whittle down the case for support from 20 pages to 4 pages or 2 pages, you create a solicitor kit. That solicitor kit has everything from the case for support, frequently asked questions, renderings of your project, financial statements, your budget, your list of board members, and a pledge form. You also need to develop gift policies. Will you accept a boat if it is given to you? If you are, in Mystic or Old Saybrook, maybe. But certainly if you are in, Winstead, probably not. So what are your gift policies? What are your gift policies? What will you accept? What won't you accept? And it is important to have these in advance because otherwise it can become or seem to be subjective when you are telling a donor, no, we don't accept boats. And boats might be an outlandish example, but gift policies have a lot of good information in them. You also need to develop naming opportunities. And naming opportunities have to be carefully considered. If you are naming your community room in your library, is that going to be in perpetuity? Or is it going to be for 50 years? Or is it going to be for 25 years? And all I have to say is just remember, Avery Fisher Hall is now David Geffen Hall. So how you approach naming opportunities has to be done very thoughtfully. You also need to refine your list of all possible quiet phase donors to your campaign. That is typically someone who has a potential to give $5,000 or more over 5 years. You want that list prepared. And last, but certainly not least, all your cabinet needs to be trained in how to ask for a gift. I'm not going to go into a lot of this, but suffice it to say that no one should ever solicit anybody alone. You should always go in pairs. One person is responsible for setting up the meeting and making the ask. And the other person, which we often refer to as the second chair, is really just responsible for giving the moral support, sharing their stories, why they think this library is important. So you need both 2 people in doing it. And it is a very structured way of asking someone for a gift. You do it face to face or Zoom to Zoom, and there's a process through which you go. So most people are really nervous about asking for a gift. The other thing I will say, you will not ask anyone who does not care about the library. It is seldom that we get a no once you are sitting across from a donor, however that might be, and talking with them. The no comes, if it's going to come, when they refuse to take the meeting. So that's when the no comes into play, not when you're actually doing the solicitation. So a little bit about gift policies. It's important to have naming opportunities because donors want to feel special, yet recognizing the gift has to be equitable. So you can't, have, one donor receiving, more for their 25,000 gift than someone who gave $50,000. You need to be clear about what you will accept or won't accept as a contribution, and it needs to be the same for everybody. I also want to say, developing gift policies and naming opportunities is the board's responsibility, not the library directors. Your consultant, such as I, can give you sample gift policies. I can give you example of naming opportunities. Then you need to have your board personalize that to your library. The library director absolutely weighs in. You should be at all of the meetings. This is an integral part of what you do. but it's not your responsibility. And so it's really important that boards step up significantly during a campaign. Hopefully your boards are already there and already doing this and are wonderful. But if they're reticent, you know, this is when we need to encourage boards not to throw all of this on the back of the library directors. And your consultant can play a very strong role in doing that. So before you actually hold the feasibility reception, in between the time when the board takes a vote and it's time to do the reception, every board member must pledge their financial support. Must pledge. If 100% of your board does not commit, then you will have a very tough time raising funds, because why should someone give you $100,000 if you have a board member who's on the board who refuses to give? It is sometimes during this period that you might see a couple of resignations. And, you know, from my perspective, that's acceptable. You know, they don't want to pledge. They understand that you need to raise this money to you know, renovate or add on to your library. And they're doing the gracious thing by stepping down. So I think you need to look at it from that perspective. Also, if there's any lead donors, you know, that donor, my donor I told you about, who said, I want to be that $250,000 donor, that donor should be solicited before the feasibility reception as well. So the feasibility reception, you gather the people who participated in the study, you share the findings of the study, and you share the changes you have made to the case because what they said. You also answer any questions that people say. I will tell you the number one question is always parking. I'm hoping a couple of you chuckle as I say that. Well, what's this going to do with the parking? Is there going to be enough parking? And if you didn't answer the question about parking in your case, when they read it, then you can answer the question during the feasibility reception. At the feasibility reception, you announce you are going to launch a campaign and your preliminary campaign goal. I emphasize the word preliminary because the goal hopefully will increase as contributions increase over time. When I recommend a goal, I personally am very, very conservative because it is better to overachieve your goal than to underachieve it. So during the quiet phase of the campaign, you can raise your goal as much as you want. Once you're public, you can raise it once, but no more than that. And the final thing at the feasibility reception, you share how much has been raised to date. And that is how much the board has pledged and what your lead gift was. So say you had your board, you were doing a $3 million campaign. Your board pledged over 5 years, $800,000, and you had one donor who pledged $300,000 and another donor who pledged $100,000. You can literally tell everyone we have a $3 million campaign goal. We have already raised 1.4 million. What that says to everyone in the Zoom room is, oh my God, you're already on your way. You are going to be successful. I need to jump on the bandwagon. That's momentum. That shows that this campaign has strong momentum and will be successful. So if you remember in the beginning, I said how structured they were, how methodical they were. That is why we do it this way, because we can get to this point and say, we have this goal. We've already raised 1.4 million, and then you are ready to go out and solicit everyone you have as a major donor. And that all happens during the quiet phase of the campaign. During this phase, 80 to 90% of your funds are raised. During this phase, you'll have larger donors via small receptions. The couple of campaigns I launched during this pandemic, we did Zoom receptions probably every 2 to 3 weeks, and then followed up those Zoom receptions by soliciting the people who were at the reception. The quiet means you do not share your goal or how much you have raised to date, except with the people you are asking to support you. So you might say, well, doesn't everyone know you're in the campaign? Ironically, they don't. It's just not talked about when you're in the quiet phase of the campaign. If you, for example, the person who is getting the town votes, if people say, well, how are you going to raise the rest of the money? We're in the early phases of a campaign. We are exploring a campaign, and you use those words without saying how much you've raised to date or what your goal is. So it doesn't deny that you're not thinking about a campaign or in the early stages. You just don't share your goal or how much you've raised to date. You should stay in the quiet phase until you have raised every dollar from every donor who could potentially give you $5,000 or more. That's it. And then once you've met all those donors, then you go public. So many organizations, and particularly boards, push to go public. Well, shouldn't we go public? Isn't it good to go public? If you go public too early, your campaign simply will not achieve as much success. The cachet of giving during the quiet phase of the campaign is an insider thing. It's what donors of high net worth prefer. They prefer to invest in you early. They prefer to give early money. Once you state you go public, they're not in anymore. They're not going to give to you. So you literally lose money by going public too early. So there's no downside to staying in the quiet phase of the campaign. Literally, you could almost have your entire building built and still be in the quiet phase of the campaign. You take your donors on hard hat tours through the building as it's being renovated. You take them through before your opening, before you've got the furniture in, before the floors are finished. You can do all of that while still in the quiet phase of the campaign. The public phase, the quiet phase can last 12 to 24 months typically. I think on average they're 18, and it really is going through. So if you quickly go through all your donors, yes, you can get out of the quiet phase sooner. There are many organizations that don't ever launch a public phase to a campaign, and all the money is raised during a quiet phase. I do not recommend that for a library, because what you really want is that outpouring of community goodwill to be part of your campaign. That is why you actually do go into a public phase of the campaign. In the public phase, the campaign is officially announced once you have raised most of the money. For the library I was just talking about, we had our public phase launch a week ago last Saturday. And we did a ceremonial groundbreaking. The groundbreaking isn't going to actually be for several months, but it was time to go public. And so we did a ceremonial groundbreaking. We only have 10% of the money left to raise. This is going to be in small contributions. You're going to be doing it by direct mail, postcards with a QR code on it. You're going to be doing online fundraising, peer-to-peer fundraising. For goodness sakes, you might even see some bake sales. This is how the public phase goes. Your local retailers, your local businesses, this is where they give. You can make up a decal, for anyone who gives $1,000, you get a decal on your window saying, I'm the proud supporter of your library. There are a lot of different, very kind of grassroots. I've seen campaigns for libraries, which includes, kids, raising money for the library. So there's a lot of different ways that you can have the public phase. But recognize, it takes a lot of bake sales to raise $300,000. And that's what 10% of a $3 million campaign is. So you want to keep it in perspective and really raise as much money as you possibly can during the quiet phase. I wanted to just kind of share with you, how it all looks in terms of a graph. So your board decides to explore a campaign. Campaign steering committee is formed. You develop your case for support. You identify the very best prospects, and then you conduct a feasibility study. The feasibility study report is presented to the steering committee, who presents it to the board, who votes to approve a quiet phase of a campaign with an initial campaign goal. The board makes their pledges, lead gifts are secured, and a campaign infrastructure is put into place. Then the feasibility study participants are invited to a reception via Zoom, and the quiet phase is launched. Then the cabinet, like the next day, sets up the meetings to solicit the major donors. This is what happens for 12 to 24 months. You are right here until 80% of your goal is achieved. And then your public phase kicks off, and then your campaign closes and you celebrate. That's it in a nutshell. I'm going to just kind of say what is expected of a campaign consultant. To provide guidance throughout the process, a consultant will help you draft the case for support. It helps you identify the best prospects. It provides instruction on how to reach out to people who will be interviewed. Your consultant conducts the feasibility interviews. The consultant prepares a report for the board and then outlines the next steps for launching the quiet phase of the campaign. The expectations of the board during the feasibility study is to establish a steering committee, to provide the relevant data, information, anecdotes, and pictures to prepare the case for support, to provide data to assess donor potential and participate in a rate and review, to reach out to those with whom you want to be interviewed, and inquire whether or not they would be willing to be interviewed. And then the board receives the report and votes to proceed or not proceed with the campaign. During the quiet phase of the campaign, the board addresses the questions that were raised during the feasibility study, makes necessary changes in the case, and provides answers. The board sets a reasonable preliminary campaign goal for the quiet phase of the campaign. The board accepts gift policy, naming opportunities, a campaign budget, and supports an infrastructure to conduct the campaign. That infrastructure here might also include hiring a campaign manager or a part-time campaign assistant to manage the day-to-day activities of a campaign. The board is responsible for soliciting or helping to solicit donors to the campaign. The board is also responsible for introducing new people who might be willing to support the campaign. There are also lasting benefits of a capital campaign. A capital campaign can energize your board. Nothing is more exciting than the first few months in the quiet phase, when all of a sudden you're going from maybe 400,000 to you're up to 1.4 million. I mean, that is just an adrenaline high for everybody. You also start enjoying bigger gifts from your board members. You know, it boosts investment in your development program because boards begin to understand what really goes into fundraising. It improves your overall ability to raise money, and it increases your nonprofit's visibility. Capital campaigns encourage the face-to-face interaction. It's a way of engaging new community leaders and attracting more volunteers. And it helps your organization reach a whole new level, both from the perception of the community and from within the realization of what you can do and what you can accomplish. So I just want to share with you, this I think is the Westport Library, who underwent a significant capital campaign to achieve this. This campaign was a good 10 years in the making. I don't know why, but library campaigns take longer than any other campaign. I think it's the community involvement. I think it's the complication of what the building is going to entail. It's the engagement of the board in the process. Sometimes there's a lot of red tape you need to walk through. They just take a little bit longer, but, you know, hang in there. And the time spent waiting was well worth it. So I've left 15 minutes for questions and answers, and I am going to turn on my video, and I invite any of you and all of you to do the same, and to certainly feel free to ask any questions, share any insights you might have, and talk to me. Hopefully it wasn't too overwhelming.
I think you make it sound really easy. It seems so doable when you present it this way. You know, like I said at the beginning, we just went through ours, and it was kind of scary going through it, because it does feel like this huge, overwhelming process.
Yeah, and it's really funny that you say that, Katie, because I get that all the time. And one of the things I often find is people will ask me for 5 steps ahead. Well, all right, after you're done doing the feasibility interviews and we have the infrastructure in place, how do we do those first few solicitations in the quiet phase? And I'm like, don't even go there. Don't even think about gift acceptance policies or infrastructure. The best way, because campaigns are so beautifully structured, the best way to approach any campaign is just one step at a time. You know, get a good consultant who will walk with it through every single step with you. You know, they'll talk you down off the shelf, off the ledge when you're ready to get on the ledge. You know, they'll keep your spirits bolstered. They'll make sure that you're crossing every T and dotting every I, and just walk you through the very methodical process. To me, it is easy as you're walking through these steps, because I've done it so many times. But I do know it's overwhelming, because most of you have never been through a capital campaign. And I will tell you, many development officers have never been through a capital campaign. Capital campaigns are not a dime a dozen. You know, I was lucky because I started my fundraising career in hospitals, and every single hospital had a capital campaign I was at. And then when I worked for a large human service organization, we had another capital campaign. So by the time I became a consultant, I had already walked through 4 capital campaigns. And so, you know, once you do one, you understand what they're all about, and they feel so much more comfortable when you're going through it the second time around, because you know, like, oh my gosh, is this ever going to happen? And then you realize, yeah, it does happen. I did have to laugh at the library. One of the people who showed up for the groundbreaking announcement of the public phase of the campaign literally went up to one of the cabinet members and said, "So how did this happen?" And the cabinet member said, "I have no idea, but here we are." And I'm like, all right, this did not happen accidentally. There was a structure and a process to all of this. Any other questions? Any other fears?
I just wanted to say, I'm curious for the other librarians who are here. I know in the past, some people have talked about, you know, things that they're interested in or different phases. Where is everybody kind of at in terms of the capital campaign part? I I'm just curious what your experience has been recently, if anyone wants to share.
Well, I can speak for West Haven. We're looking to get started. We had a branch that was closed to the city selling the building, so we're looking for a new space and a new location, and it'll be a new library building. So it's kind of starting from the ground floor. And I do worry about that, the board piece, and that the board should be doing a lot of it, and it doesn't become director responsibility.
Yeah.
Um,
That's absolutely critical, because a library director cannot carry this burden, 100%. And I do think that's the responsibility of a consultant you hire, to make it very clear to the board that they need to step up to the plate for this. And this is what the expectations are. And in my experience, I've not had, I get a lot of board pushback for, basic fundraising, and taking on that role. But I don't get the same kind of pushback in a capital campaign. And I think because they really understand, the urgency of raising this money if you want to have a new building. The other thing I do in looking at your assessment is also look at your staffing, and really recommend, in most cases, I recommend bringing on at least a part-time person for the duration of the campaign to help with the list management, to help develop the packets, to help manage the pledge process, whatever that might be, so that the role of the library director can be at the table with the board meeting members, making decisions about it, advising on strategy, and meeting some donors, herself, and not necessarily, doing the back office stuff for the campaign, because you've got enough of that on your plate. If you have a really good, development admin or back office person, that person can probably take this on. With it, it's not a huge amount of work, because you're not necessarily doing, you're not a $30 million, $50 million, $100 million campaign with multiple pledges coming in every hour. It's reasonable for a library, but it is important that the board step up in doing it, because it's not a staff function.
Does anybody else want to share anything?
And you can turn on your videos too, so I get to see you all. Hi, Lauren.
Hi, I can share. We're just wrapping up a capital campaign, actually. So it's been about 4 years, but we just announced at our virtual fundraiser this past February the successful end. And we've actually had a few significant pledges come in since then as well. So we've surpassed the 2 million goal.
Yeah, the pledges seem to come in for anywhere from 2 to 6 months afterwards. You continue to get pledges. Hi, Emily.
Hello.
Any other thoughts? Well, I want to invite, if any of you are exploring this and you have any questions that you want to ask me offline, you can, you can send it to info, I-N-F-O, at Danosky, DANOSKY.com. Thanks, Robbie. You have a capital campaign committee already, so you are moving forward. All right.
Sharon, thank you so much. I think this was great. I feel like we're all a little shell-shocked. Just the idea, whatever process, wherever you are in the process, it is still a scary thing. But I don't know. I really appreciate you taking the time to share with us and put this together and make it feel like it's something we can kind of wrap our hands around. And I will just share with everybody else. I saw Sharon, you did your webinar last year about major gifts, and that's another thing that's kind of scary for people. It's just sitting down and asking for those major gifts. And you made it seem very doable.
Yeah.
And so I just appreciated the way you share the information I find it very helpful.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I do recognize, fundraising is not something that comes automatically, to everyone. And, and you don't have, I think, I began in hospitals and healthcare, and I had a full staff. When I went over to a human service organization, I didn't. And so, there is a difference in how you need to approach and look at it. And you need to do what is really reasonable and easy. So thank you all so much. Delighted to spend this time with you. And again, any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me or call me or whatever. I'm just happy to share.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.